This week marks the end of one chapter of this campaign.
The primary race is over right now, and the general election starts immediately. It starts tomorrow morning.
On the Republican side,
the time has now come to suspend my campaign.
Trump's only remaining challenger, Nikki Haley, is out of the race.
I said I wanted Americans to have their voices heard. I have done that. I have no regrets.
And on the Democratic side,
Biden secured more than 1,400 delegates. That is more than 72% of the total that he needs to secure the Democratic nomination.
President Biden swept off 15 states. So it's Super Tuesday behind us. The matchup that we've been expecting is clear. Another Trump-Biden election.
That November rematch that most Americans tell us they don't want, well, it's exactly what we're all going to get.
There's 100 million people waking up today just absolutely shaking their heads at that we're in this position.
Regardless of the fact that the majority of Americans continue to say that they wish they had other options. So for the next 2 weeks, I want to focus on answering the question we hear more than anything else, and answer it more directly than we ever have before. How exactly do we end up with these two candidates? And why? From the New York Times, I'm Instead Herndon. This is The Run-Up. On a basic level, Joe Biden is the Democratic nominee for a very simple reason.
This is not a time to be complacent. That's why I'm running for re-election.
He decided to run again. But the path to get there wasn't that simple. Before the 2022 midterms, there were a lot of Democrats who were unsure if Biden was the party's best option in 2024. After the midterm elections, where Democrats did much better than most expected, the party moved quickly to consolidate support around Biden. First, top leaders made clear, we're sticking with him. Next, the Democratic National Committee changed the rules. At Biden's request,
Democrats this weekend turning their attention to South Carolina, the first time that the state is getting to go first in the Democratic primary.
Making South Carolina the first state to vote in the presidential primary. Democrats said they did this to reward the loyalty of Black voters. But it also made it harder for any serious contender to challenge the president, considering that South Carolina Democrats are among the most pro-Biden in the country. So that's where I wanted to start, with the party's role in making this happen.
Elaine Kamarck. I'm a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. I write books and papers, and I'm the author of Primary Politics, Everything You Need to Know About How America Nominates Its Presidential Candidates.
I went back to Elaine Kamarck.
I am an at-large member of the DNC, and I'm on the Rules Committee. And I've been on the Rules Committee for a long, long time.
Who I first spoke to last year at the DNC meeting where she voted to make those state order changes official.
You know, we're doing this episode because of a question that comes up all the time for our listeners, which is kind of a basic and obvious one, just like, how did this happen? You know, it may seem like an obvious question, but I wanted to pose it to you in the direct way we get it from our listeners. Like, why is Joe Biden the Democratic nominee in 2024, and how did that happen?
Well, he's the Democratic nominee in 2024 because he is the incumbent president. People who are president of the United States are in position to make a lot of friends and a lot of people happy, which he has done over the years. Most Democrats think he's done a very good job. They're happy with the job he's done. They go all the way back to when he managed to get vaccines in the arms of most of the people in America who wanted them, and they are grateful to him for that. They're grateful to him for straightening out the supply chains in the economy and being able to bring inflation down. So mostly they like the guy. And secondly, nobody ran against him. Or nobody who was very powerful or strong ran against him.
Yep.
In other words, you can't beat someone with no one.
Yeah.
And that is maybe rule number one of politics. So people are complaining and complaining. They think Joe Biden's too old. A couple of years ago, Nancy Pelosi ran for Speaker of the House. And guess what? There are a group of young congressmen, mostly men, some women, who thought Nancy Pelosi was too old. Well, she got reelected. Why? nobody ran against her. So listen, you got to have a horse if you're going to beat someone, and it's very hard to beat an incumbent president. And nobody ran against him, and he's going to be our nominee.
Last time we spoke was back at the DNC winter meeting in Philly, which was just, more than a year ago and just after the midterm elections. And at that time, I was hearing a lot of the things that I think you're reminding people of now. Democrats were riding high from a better than expected midterms. And there was pretty universal confidence in the reelection of Joe Biden. So much so that people were pretty dismissive at the time. I remember kind of being the heretic in the room who was saying that, polling tells us majority of Americans wanted more options or things like that. When you think back to last year, is there anything you would say is different from then to now in terms of maybe the party's relationship or thoughts towards November and Biden's prospects at reelection?
I don't think there's much difference. I think the party is very united, and the party voters and sort of the party office holders are very united behind Biden. One of the things I think we should be reminded of, and it was evident in 22, but it's much more evident now, is that there has been nothing that has united the Democratic Party more than Donald Trump.
Yes.
Donald Trump, because he's an authoritarian, because people disagree with him, because he appointed the Supreme Court justices that overturned Roe. I mean, there's just a long, long list of reasons why Donald Trump keeps the Democratic Party absolutely united. And while some Democrats would rather have a younger candidate, et cetera, people are not going to abandon Biden if they think it's going to elect Trump.
Right. The prospect of Trump keeping Democrats together. I remember that being a theme of last year. I mean, that's clear, but I also think about the ways that people were telling me in Philadelphia that, Biden just needs a little more time, that by the end of the year, you'll see those approval numbers turn around, the accomplishments will sink in, the polling will turn around, and there will be more kind of tangible signs of enthusiasm. That has not really come yet. Why don't you think we've seen that movement so far if the party is as united around him as you're saying?
I can't quite explain that, okay? I think there's some feeling that he's aged a lot, okay? Even though I can tell you that 3 weeks ago, I had the privilege of going to the House Democratic Retreat in Leesburg, Virginia. I sat 20 feet away from the president. I watched him give a speech. Then he went off stage and the press was sent out of the room. And he came back and sat next to Hakeem Jeffries, the majority leader, and about 10 Democratic members of the House stood up and asked him questions. And he was fine, right? He was answering the questions. He had a briefing book on his lap, which he would occasionally look at to get a fact or a figure, but he was perfectly cogent, knew all the answers, wasn't bumbling around. Now, the interesting thing about that afternoon is literally while the president was on stage with us, people started looking at their phones and the Her report broke.
Oh.
So here we were in a ballroom listening to a president who was quite competent and looking at our phones telling us that he was demented. And it just was a surreal experience. This guy doesn't have any mental problems. Does he walk funny? Yeah. He's got bad knees or bad back. Something's wrong. Okay. But in terms of the judgment, which is, after all, what we elect a president for, he was great. I've got a mother with dementia. I know what dementia looks like.
It's interesting because you do identify that one thing that maybe has changed from last year to this year is a perception of him maybe as older that has sunk in. But you're saying, and Democrats have said kind of consistently, that is not square up with the reality of the person we see, nor does that square up with the kind of private reality of the person making decisions. I think that story is really interesting that you tell right here. But I guess I'm like, isn't the perception problem a political problem?
It absolutely is. I mean, I don't want to underestimate that. It absolutely is. But I think the other thing to remember is, look, we don't elect presidents for their ability to be high jumpers or long distance runners, right? We elect them fundamentally for their judgment. And how do you get good judgment? Experience, right? And one of the things we can say with absolute certainty is that in his first term, Donald Trump showed consistently poor judgment. And we have no indication that his judgment has gotten any better, right, in the years he's been out of office. So I think when people settle down and they say, okay, so the guy looks old, the question is, what does he say? What does he do? And I would add one more thing to that.
Yep.
Washington is a small town. Okay. Everybody talks to everybody. There's just a rumor a minute, et cetera. The president of the United States must see 50, 100 people every week.
You're like, if he had, I get where you're going.
Yeah. Okay. So if he
Wait,
were.
you got to finish it, though. You got to finish saying it. I cut you off.
So if he were like babbling, if he were forgetting his lines, if he were incoherent, guess what? We'd all know it. It would take no time at all. Because so many people, he interacts with all these people every week.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that this will settle down.
Mm-hmm. I guess I want to ask in a couple specific ways about the DNC's kind of thinking on that. Because part of the reason I wanted to talk to you is because the last time we spoke, there were some of those rule changes in the air at the winter meeting. Looking back at the changes in the primary order, how would you assess their success?
Well, I don't think we can't really tell if they're, quote, successful or not because we didn't have a contest. As to how this is all going to work out, in 2028, it remains to be seen. Then we'll have an open primary. Then there'll be a lot of people in it. But this time, I think it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I guess, and maybe this is, cynical journalists jumping out, but part of me thinks that, the purpose of the change of the order was to not have a serious contest. And is there any validity to the idea that moving South Carolina first helped ensure that there were no challengers, serious challengers that were going to get into play?
I don't think so. I don't think that was what was going on there. Okay. And I don't think it really operated like that. I think that the fact that he moved South Carolina first was his thank you to the loyalty of African-American voters to the Democratic Party. What you have to understand about those early states in the Democratic race, or frankly, it works the same in the Republican race too, is that it's all about expectations. And if there was somebody who decided to challenge Biden and they got 45% of the vote in South Carolina, guess what? That would have been read as a win.
Mm-hmm. Is there a timeline that you're looking for as someone who's obviously deeply invested in the Democrats and Biden? Is there a timeline to know when these things should turn around or when we should see maybe approval numbers or folks looking more excited? Or is it just, as long as they come through on election day, then that's it. And if people want to freak out till then that's what it's going to be.
Well, people will freak out no matter what.
They will.
They will. I think that we will have clarity at the end of August.
Okay.
Because once we go through both conventions and Trump will present himself in the best light that he can.
Yeah.
We will have a lot of data from his various trials and people will, kind of reevaluate based on what comes out of the trials, where Trump is. Biden will have his convention and make his case and connect it to real people. I think we'll have some clarity then.
Okay. This kind of brings me to my final set of questions. I think that it sticks out to me that in this conversation, a lot of it makes political sense. I get how the parties work. I get how Biden made the decisions and things like that. How we kind of arrived here in the kind of classic answer to our question. But it does strike me that the public's desires that we have heard consistently over the last 3-4 years about wanting more options, about wanting kind of younger candidates, don't seem to really factor in. I guess if I was a Democrat who doesn't hate Biden, but just wanted other options or was nervous about having a president who would be 86 at the end of their second term, from the DNC perspective, what is your message to me?
Nobody else ran. My message to you is nobody else ran. Okay. So in the absence of somebody else running, you have to support Joe Biden. Pure and simple. That's where we are.
Yeah.
You simply can't randomly say, oh, yeah, well, I'm worried about Biden's age if there's no other alternative. Yeah. You need alternatives. The Republicans are also worried about Trump. They're worried about his nuttiness. They're worried about his age, his criminal indictments, et cetera. They got a lot to worry about. They are having a race right? Nikki Haley is not beating Trump, but at least there is some place Republican voters can go to if they really want to be against Trump and express their distaste for Trump. Democrats don't have any place they can go.
Yeah, I do think that is true. I guess I just want to push on a second, though. Like, it's not as if Democrats, national Democrats, were neutral actors here. We have reporting about the Biden campaign kind of doing a private discouragement of other people getting in the race. We know that the state order was changed. We know that some state Democratic parties, like places in North Carolina, have left Biden's challengers completely off the ballot. I'm not saying that there's like some mass conspiracy or anything. I guess I'm saying, like, does party politics as usual, has it contributed to a reality that for a lot of people we talk to feels kind of undemocratic, feels like not what they wanted? I guess I'm saying, like, right. At what point was the public in this, Well,
the public gets in it when they vote.
Yeah.
And look, these polls have been around for 2 years, and they were not persuasive enough to get somebody to throw their hat in the ring.
Yeah.
And so Democrats who are nervous about Biden are left with really no alternative because no one got in. I mean, was Marianne Williamson a better option than Joe Biden? No, nobody thought so. So, you didn't have a Gavin Newsom throwing his hat in the ring, and nothing kept him from doing that. He could have raised a lot of money. He could have gone out there. He could have done that. Nothing really kept him from doing it other than a sense that Biden had done a good job and that he was a steady hand on the tiller.
Are we sure about that? I mean, I think not that Biden hasn't done a good job. That's what I'm saying. But when I ask people why didn't they run, there's a kind of recognition that there is such a social kind of pressure, such a deference to incumbency that, like, tradition itself matters just as much, if not more, as if the person's doing a good job. Like, how should we rank tradition and deference in with people's legitimate assessment of Joe Biden as president?
Listen, if you read some American history, you will find that presidents who were not thought to be doing a good job, they had challengers.
Yeah.
So let me start with President Gerald Ford in 1976. Who challenged him? Ronald Reagan. Mm-hmm. Let's go to President Jimmy Carter, who in 1980 was not thought to be doing a very good job. Who challenged him? Senator Kennedy.
Yep.
Okay. In other words, there's been plenty of instances where candidates or incumbent presidents who were thought to be doing a bad job, they got themselves a powerful challenger from within the party. And that happened in both parties. So you need that predicate. The predicate is the president has to have not been perceived by the members of his party to not be doing a good job. And that is not the same as just being old.
Got it. That's clear. I guess my last question would just be a year change. We last talked to you last year, and there was confidence from Democrats and from you about where Joe Biden was heading in to re-election. A year from now, like with us in the new year, closer to November, where are you now?
I'm still confident. I think that the age issue has increased. It surprised me sort of the extent to which that has increased over this year. But I would point out that starting in 2018 and all the way up through the special elections in 2023, Democrats have outperformed the polls. So there's this pervasive sort of pessimism going on in Democratic circles. And then we get to Election Day, and guess what? The Democrats are winning. Democrats took the entire Virginia legislature this year when everybody was thinking, oh, no, they're only going to take one. They maybe could take one house. So this overperformance of Democrats when it comes to real elections, I think has been the most positive thing for Democrats. And it makes me still optimistic that Biden will win in 2024.
There's enough signs of top to bottom party health that no matter the kind of criticisms of the individual candidate's age or things like that, you think the Democratic Party has put itself in a good position?
I think they are in a good position. And I think that as in politics, the Democrats are lucky because the Republicans have put themselves in a bad position. They're about to nominate somebody who's under criminal indictment, and they reversed Roe v. Wade.
I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your honesty. And thank you so much for taking some time out.
You are quite welcome. Nice to talk to you.
So the question of why and how Joe Biden became the Democratic nominee is a little more nuanced than just saying the party decided. Nobody ran against Biden. He continues to win in the primary contests held so far. And for a lot of Democrats, especially at the top levels of the party, Biden has a host of policy accomplishments he can point to that make them totally comfortable with the idea of his reelection bid and unreceptive to the idea that there's anything undemocratic about what's happened here. We'll be right back. So the Democratic Party cleared the way for President Biden to run again without a serious challenge, as is tradition. But that's only one piece of the equation when it comes to why Joe Biden is asking for 4 more years. The other piece is that Biden himself is absolutely convinced that he's the person singularly suited to beat Donald Trump, the only person who can, even at 81 years old. That was made very clear in the New Yorker piece that came out this week, where Biden explained how he's thinking about his candidacy. He said he was always planning to run for re-election and reiterated that he's the Democrat best positioned to win. With that in mind, I wanted to go inside the Biden inner circle to understand the president's thinking and push on the reasoning behind his absolute conviction.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, Ested. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you? Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Can you introduce yourself and tell me what you do?
I'm Ron Klain. I used to be chief of staff at the White House.
A short and sweet. What do you do now?
I'm in the private sector. I'm a general counsel for a large company.
Mm-hmm. So I called Ron Klain, a trusted voice in Biden world. Klain has worked with Biden on the policy side and the political side. He was a senior advisor for Biden's 2020 presidential run before joining him in the White House.
One of the reasons we wanted to talk to you is that for a lot of people, I think you function as a stand-in for President Biden himself. You served as the first chief of staff, as you said. You previously served as chief of staff when he was vice president. You were a senior advisor on the Biden 2020 campaign. And you're one of the members of the kind of Biden inner circle. When did you first meet Joe Biden? I'm curious.
I first met now President Biden back in 1986. In 1986, he was getting ready to run for president in 1988. And his chief strategist was a guy named John Martella based in Boston. I'd worked with John on a number of campaigns in the Boston area, and John urged me to get involved in the Biden campaign. So I did.
That's a long scope of knowing a person, not only as a boss, but as a person, a political figure. How would you describe the Joe Biden that you know, not just as a politician, but as an individual, as a boss?
He's a very compassionate and caring person. He's always been very supportive for me and my family, and I love the man.
In 2015, Joe Biden decided not to run for president, and you joined Hillary Clinton's campaign. You have experience in the art of running against Donald Trump. Before I ask about 2020 or 2024, I wanted to ask kind of about your work in 2016. Is there anything about that you took with you to 2020 or even applies to now?
Look, I think it's a mistake to underestimate Donald Trump. It's a mistake to underestimate his ability to take candidates and morph their image in the public mind. And he was able to do that successfully with Secretary Clinton. He wasn't able to do that with former Vice President Biden in 2020. I think that was a big part of the difference. So I think you need a certain kind of candidate to beat Donald Trump. That's a candidate that's hard to caricature and hard to build a false image of, which is what Trump is good at. It's what he did to his Republican opponents in the primaries in 2016 successfully. It's what he did to Hillary Clinton in 2016. I think Biden is a little bit Teflon on that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, that's a helpful. Part of our premise in our episode today is to answer a really central question that we get from a lot of voters and our listeners. We also posed this to Elaine Kamarck of the DNC. And I know it's like a basic one in political kind of world because President Biden is obviously the incumbent president. And for most of history, incumbent presidents have always run for re-election. But I guess I wanted to ask more broadly, why is Joe Biden running for re-election, particularly given that, most of Americans, including some Democrats, consistently say that in our reporting and in national polling that they thought he was too old to run again?
Well, I would say this. A lot of people have run against Donald Trump. Only one has ever beaten him, and that's Joe Biden. So I think he is running in part because he's succeeded in defeating Donald Trump, and I think he's our best option to defeat Donald Trump in 2024, protect our democracy. I also think he's done a good job as president. He ran on a very aggressive agenda for president to have the country recover from the pandemic, to address 4 crises he saw: a crisis of the economy in the wake of the pandemic, a crisis of climate change, a crisis of racism, and obviously then the healthcare crisis coming out of the pandemic. And so we set to work on day one to try to address all 4 crises, and I feel like we made good progress on all 4 of them. Although there's a big unfinished agenda, and he's running to finish that agenda. I think he has a track record that merits reelection and an agenda that will drive a second term, and the proven track record of taking on and defeating Donald Trump.
You know, I want to dig deeper there and partly go back to 2020 to do that, because you mentioned the first one about he's the person to beat Donald Trump and he has the proven track record there. I remember President Biden's age kind of being an open discussion back in 2020, even some folks thinking he should take a pledge to serve only 1 term. Can you take me inside the campaign at the time? You were a senior advisor. Was there any discussion of his advanced age at that point? And how did you all go about trying to respond to the pressure of those concerns?
Well, obviously, it was an issue in 2020. People raised it. But, I think he defeated it by campaigning, by putting his agenda before the country. He had, I think, a bold agenda that I think helped reject the idea that he was too old, because he was very forward-looking on issues like climate change and race and other issues like that. And I think that agenda and his energy in the campaign, his success in debating Donald Trump in the fall, I think all overcame those objections. Age was an issue in 2020. It's an issue in 2024, but it's an issue. And there are other issues too. And I think the sum of the issues favored Biden in 2020. I think they will again in 2024.
I also, though, remember at the time during the Democratic primary, there being some discussion of this. And Biden said, I view myself as a bridge, not as anything else. Biden also said, I view myself as a transition candidate. I know a lot of people who interpreted that at Biden at the time, saying that he was only going to serve 1 term, including media stories that quoted top Biden advisors. Was that not a message that was coming from the campaign back in 2020, that there was a possibility that there would just be 1 term of President Biden?
Well, I think the first had to be a term. And so I don't think people in 2020 were worried about a second term. We were worried about beating Donald Trump and ending the 4-year disaster we had seen. So, I think the president is a bridge. He obviously comes from another generation. His successor will be of a different generation than he is. So I think that is definitely what 4 or 8 years is going to be about. And I think that also, I understand there was a lot of skepticism in 2020. The New York Times endorsed not 1, but 2 other candidates in the primaries and wrote off his candidacy in a single paragraph in the endorsement editorial, a very dismissive paragraph. And so there's been a lot of skepticism about him from the start. He's overcome that skepticism. Democratic voters nominated him in 2020. He is getting a strong vote in the primaries in 2024 as well. And I think that that's where he will be proven at the polls, ultimately on Election Day.
I guess I'm asking because when we are on the road, we talk to so many people, including Democrats, who say that it did not even enter their mind the prospect that they would be voting for Biden in a kind of second term, that they thought that there was a kind of implicit understanding of they didn't know what was going to happen, but that they were kind of pulling an emergency lever in 2020. There was a lot of stories at the time, I remember, about the signaling of the possibility of 1 term. I'm asking, did you all overcome those concerns in the campaign partially by signaling to voters, both publicly and Biden statements and privately in media stories, that he may serve 1 term, that was a possibility?
I think we overcame those concerns by defeating Donald Trump. So I don't think the campaign was not running on a message of 1 term. And in fact, that was suggested that he make that pledge. He did not. He specifically did not. And I think, voters got what they expected in 2020. And now he's running again in 2024.
I saw in the New Yorker piece where President Biden is quoted extensively, him say that it was never a doubt in his mind that he was going to run for re-election. And I guess the certainty of that message kind of stood at odds with some of the things I felt like I had heard back in 2020. And I think a kind of public sense about Biden and the choice that they were making in 2020. I'm wondering, was it clear to you or others that he was kind of certain to run for re-election as he has said? And if so, is that something a public maybe should have known in 2020 as they were electing an oldest president to ever be inaugurated?
Well, I think the president's certainty about this came as he became president, and he had success in delivering on some of the promises. And then we had a stunning success in the 2022 midterms, which was unexpected, and I think validated his approach. I never heard him express any doubts about running for re-election, but he didn't run in 2020 to run for 2 terms. He ran in 2020 to get elected. He did get elected, and he's been serving as president.
Another 2020 decision I want to ask about is the selection of Vice President Kamala Harris. And specifically, what I've noticed is another big gap between kind of how the politics is talked about and maybe the public's understanding of it. It was my understanding in the profile I reported for the New York Times Magazine last year that Harris was selected as Biden's running mate to be a, quote, governing partner, as Biden's 2020 campaign chief, Anita Dunn, told me at the time. But I think for a lot of people, they thought it was Biden kind of following through on that previous promise to build a new generation, that they were maybe setting up the president in waiting. I wanted to ask, how was the campaign thinking about the selection of Vice President Harris at the time, and how should voters think about her on the ticket right now?
Well, I think the president's first priority in picking a vice president was to find someone who would be a partner in governing. There was no question about it. And then Senator Harris was his pick. And I think she's done a very good job as vice president, working with him on a lot of important issues, both domestically and internationally. And I don't know what her political future will be. That'll be up to her. But she's done a good job as vice president. And I think as an asset to the president in 2024, she's very effective with voters. She was effective on the campaign trail in 2020. She will help him win in 2024.
Mm-hmm. Republicans are making a really explicit argument that a vote for President Biden is a vote for President Harris. If I am someone thinking about the argument Republicans are making on that side, how would you, as a Democrat or, a Biden campaign, respond to that?
A vote for President Biden is a vote for the Biden-Harris team. Joe Biden will be president. Kamala Harris will be vice president. She'll continue to help him as she has, make the hard decisions and give him advice. But Joe Biden is running to be president. And I'm confident if he's reelected, he'll serve all 4 years.
Mm-hmm. All right, then how should I think about the kind of place that Elise polling or some of our reporting would tell us we're in? Bloomberg Morning Consult says Biden's trailing Trump by an average of 5 points in swing states like North Carolina, Arizona, Georgia, Nevada. The Times poll over the weekend find Biden trailing Trump 43% to 48%. Even if you don't find the kind of horse race takeaway to be the main thing here, which I think we probably both agree it's too early to treat these things as determinative, I guess I'm asking, what can Democrats take away from a consistency of results that does seem to say that the president does have a sticking unpopularity and that the kind of policy accomplishments that I hear about from Democrats, and I understand passed in a bigger way than folks expected, doesn't seem to have necessarily translated to folks just yet? How should we think about this?
The way I think about it is that elections are choices, and each time during his term, voters have gone to the polls. They've chosen Joe Biden and the Democrats over the Republican Party led by Donald Trump. We had a stunning historical result in 2022. And just recently, in a special election in New York, Democrats took back a seat held by the Republicans. So I think that there are polls that run in newspapers, and there's polls we have at polling places, and the president has delivered results for the party in the polls at polling places. So that's what I would say to people.
I guess there's not really a conflict between the results we see in the large portions of the Democratic Party and even the polling numbers we see, right? Like the polling tells us that Biden has a unique problem that does not translate to the rest of the party. And a lot of the evidence says that the party, when it runs candidates that are not respectfully 81, that they do fine. And so I guess I'm saying, is there anything that Democrats or the Biden campaign is doing about a question that does seem unique to this candidate?
Well, I think that the president knows that age is an issue in the campaign. He's said that. He's acknowledged that. I think you're going to see the president on the stump when we get into the campaign season. And obviously, he'll appear before the entire country this week at the State of the Union address. People can be able to assess the president, how he's doing. Mm-hmm. And I think that he'll be a vigorous campaigner on his own behalf. Mm-hmm. But I think we have to make the argument that his age allows him to have more wisdom and perspective as president at a time of a complex and a dangerous world, that Joe Biden's the person you want dealing with this mess we have in Europe with Putin invading Ukraine. And you want Joe Biden solving these hard problems because he's got the experience to do that. And certainly if the choice between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, I think Biden's a better choice.
Has anything changed for you in just the broader landscape? I hear the kind of consistency of the argument, and I think it's one that I understand. You're saying once the stakes are clear, come election day, you think the folks will make the choice to back Biden. I get that. I guess I'm saying, is there anything from last year to now that you do think has posed a greater challenge than expected?
Well, I do think that the situation in the Middle East creates a division in our party and concern in the country, as it should. And so I think it's another thing he has to address. It's another problem that he has to solve as president. So I think that has changed. I think that's another burden on him. But I think there's no better person in the Oval Office to do that than President Biden. And I'd say the other thing that's changed in the past year is the economy is getting better. The progress continues to be in the right direction. And I think as that continues, it'll sink in with voters. You're starting to see consumer confidence rise. It takes a while for people's perceptions of the economy to come around. And I think it will, in a way, and help lift the president even further politically. So I'm positive about the economy and positive about his ability to address these foreign crises.
Yeah, it does seem like that is also the big change, the situation in Gaza. You know, the Biden team has made a consistent pitch about his White House accomplishments, domestic ones like the COVID bill, infrastructure, CHIPS bill, being things that voters can kind of tangibly see and understand, and that would be a benefit to him. But it does seem like the kind of international crisis has overtaken the policy slate. Now we're hearing a lot more about pushes on the administration, both from a left and a center, who has kind of pushed back against the unwillingness to call for a ceasefire. I saw the vice president's statements on Sunday. I wondered, should I take that change of position as a tacit acknowledgement that maybe the month-long refusal to embrace a ceasefire has imperiled the re-election chances? And if not, how does Biden speak to those people to win them back?
Well, first of all, I think what the vice president said is consistent with what the president's been saying, which is that they want a ceasefire and a deal where the hostages come home and there's a ceasefire in exchange for the hostages. That's what the president's been talking about for several weeks now. And I think the vice president was simply iterating that over the weekend. Mm-hmm. So I don't think there's a change of position here. I think there is increased urgency behind the humanitarian suffering in Gaza. But I can't think of a person better equipped to deal with this crisis than Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm. You know, I have a last couple of questions. I really appreciate you kind of being a proxy for us and taking this time. You know, I hear what you're saying, and it reminds me that, you know, Biden's said in this article, you know, in the New Yorker this week, that he's running because he's the best suited person to beat Donald Trump. But as we're talking here, I've realized, you know, two things have changed since 2021. He is older, and that concern has loomed bigger in the American electorate kind of mind. And second, you know, the original 2020 campaign did have that sense of a bridge to it, the request to ask people to pull that kind of emergency lever. And both of those things are different. Does any part of you worry that the conditions of this election are so different than the one 4 years ago that the president's logic of why he's best suited no longer applies?
No, I think that you seem stuck on this idea that he promised a single term in 2020, which he explicitly did not.
I guess, can I explain?
And I think that he didn't just narrowly get across the line in 2020. He won with the largest vote for any candidate for president in the history of the country, and won overwhelmingly in the primaries against one of the largest, most talented fields anyone's ever faced, and defeating 24 candidates in the nomination battle for president, including a dramatic victory on Super Tuesday in 2020. So I think that his victory in 2020 wasn't some kind of just reluctant act of the American people. It showed record levels of vote in the general. And I think what's changed since then is, I'll admit, he is older, but he also is even more experienced. He has delivered results, and he also has an agenda for 2024. So yes, 2024 is obviously a different election than 2020. It's 4 years later, different issues. But the candidates are going to be the same, and I think the outcome will be the same.
I guess I'm not really stuck on the words that he says. I'm saying that the words that he said are indicative of a larger feeling that we hear all the time, which is that an American public did not expect Joe Biden to be running for 2 terms. And we hear this from Democrats, independents, across the aisle. I guess I'm saying, if you don't think that that was a perception the 2020 campaign gave to people, why do you think it's such a surprise that the president's running for re-election?
I don't know why it's a surprise that he's running for re-election. He never suggested otherwise. And I think that ultimately the people will speak at the polls. And I think when they speak at the polls and they have the choice between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, they will choose Joe Biden, and he will be our president again.
Is saying okay. I guess I can move on. You've answered the question, and I totally understand it. Could anything happen this year that would change kind of where you are and say, maybe Joe Biden isn't best suited to be the Democratic nominee in November?
Nothing that I can imagine, no.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Recently, my colleague Ezra Klein made a kind of explicit case saying that the people Biden listens to, Barack Obama, Chuck Schumer, he named some other folks, including you, need to get him to see that Biden might not be best positioned. I wanted you to respond to that sense of argument that has certainly been in the air. And I guess I actually had a broader question, which is is that even the thing that's appropriate or people even do in your position? Or is it just Joe Biden's decision?
Well, I think ultimately it is his decision, and the decision of the Democratic primary voters who are voting for him in overwhelming numbers to be our nominee. So I'll leave it at that. Look, if I thought he wasn't the right candidate to beat Donald Trump, I wouldn't be for him running. But I think he is the right candidate. And I think that people like Ezra, who haven't really been in this business underestimate how difficult it is to beat Trump and have a view that just any generic Democrat could beat Trump. And I'll say it's much more complicated than that. And I think you need someone with the right candidate profile and the right skills. I think that is Joe Biden. And I think he defeated Trump once, so I think he'll do it again.
I wonder the specifics on candidate profile. What is it about Joe Biden that makes you think he's harder to caricature?
Well, I think he has a working class background that resonates with voters. The man from Scranton. I think the fact that he's had a very pro-union record as president and really connects with working people, I think that ultimately makes it harder for Trump to make him into something exotic. He wasn't born with a silver spoon. He didn't come from privilege. He came from, the industrial heartland of the country. And he's proven that he can go toe-to-toe with Trump on the debate stage and hold his own. And so I think that, to me, performance is a good indicator. And he performed in 2020. I think he'll perform again in 2024.
Mm-hmm. 4 years ago, I remember folks making this argument Biden's favor, and it really bore out, both in the primary and in the general. And I hear that, and I respect the consistency of which Biden has proven that argument in tangible votes. But I also feel like one thing that's changed in the last couple of years is that Biden, at least in the public, has become age caricatured, right? Even if it's outside of the actual personal qualities, even if it's not the person and president that you see every day. How do you combat against that caricature, even if his bio and his personhood is still understood by the American public?
I think we have to sell his age as an asset with the wisdom it brings, the experience it brings. Mm-hmm. And look, I think some voters will vote against him for that reason, but I think some voters vote for him for that reason. Mm-hmm. And I think he's also overperforming with voters over 65, and that changes the map quite a bit because you have older populations in places like Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Look, I think age is an issue, but it's just an issue. Mm-hmm. There are other issues. Abortion is an issue, and the economy is an issue. And so I think when voters go into the polls, they'll have a balance in their minds, and there'll be some negative things on Biden's side, more negative things on Trump's side, some positive things for Biden, some positive things for Trump. Mm-hmm. I think in that balance, Biden will come out ahead.
What both sides agree on is this election is the stakes, or at least the size of them, right? When we go to D events or R events, they say the country's on the line. And for Democrats specifically, it's about the prospect of Trump installing a wide range of anti-democratic reforms, changing our political system, our immigration system, our judicial system, all of the above. And I know that for the next 6 months, I'm going to hear arguments from national Democrats in the party saying to people who might be upset with Biden or might prefer someone younger or might not prefer a certain policy here or there, that they should put those things aside because the stakes are so large. But I do think there is some kind of missing acknowledgement that, isn't it also a risky thing for the party to do to nominate the 81-year-old incumbent who a majority of Americans perceive as too old in the first place? Isn't that a big risk too?
To me, the risky thing would be when you have someone who's beaten Trump going with an unproven national candidate to try to defeat someone who has run for president twice before and is now running a third time in Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. So, there's risks on both sides here. Mm-hmm. And every candidate has risks. And what the president de-risks is inexperience of the national stage, inexperience in dealing with Trump. He has those things. And those are assets, I think, in the race that some of these public criticisms are undercounting or undervaluing.
Mm-hmm. I hear that. I guess my last question is, okay, we get the state of play. We get kind of where we are. I've posed all the age questions to you. The Biden campaign has made a similar argument that you have made here, that the stakes will eventually bear them out. So is that just going to be like a stay the course till election day, and that the day after the election, we'll see type of thing? Or is there something about the evidence we have seen over sometimes, or some of the polling we have seen, or some of the critiques we have heard, that is going to require the Biden campaign to change a strategy before then? What do we think might shift? Because some of the arguments I hear from you all aren't things that have to change. It's just going to be we'll tell you the day after and we'll be proven correct.
Well, I think what has to change about the Biden campaign is we have to have a campaign. So, there's going to be an election. The president will go out, he'll campaign. People will hear his argument. I think they'll be persuaded by it. I think the more they see him out there on the stump, the more they'll be assuaged about his age. When they see him debating Donald Trump, going toe-to-toe with Trump, I think, again, they'll be reassured about his age, and their doubts about Trump will be reinforced. Mm-hmm. But, the thing that has to change about the campaign is we need to have a campaign, and that will come. And again, 4 years ago at this time, there were a lot of doubts about Joe Biden, doubts about whether or not he would ever become the nominee, and he overcame those doubts. And you could have said to me then, well, what's going to change? I'm saying what's going to change is we'll start voting and we'll see him win. Mm-hmm. And that's what it took. So, let the campaign unfold.
I totally hear that too, because I remember those times. I remember people telling us that Biden was down and out. I would like to say that, those of us who were reporting around Black folks in South Carolina never thought that. But I do think that a lot of people did think that. I guess I'm wondering your confidence level to this, a broader question. All I hear about when people ask me about Biden is people bring up, age. How much space did that topic take up in the inner circle versus how much space that topic takes out in the outer circle?
Look, I think everyone around the president knows this is one of the principal objections to his reelection. So it takes up a lot of time, and they understand it has to be addressed. You've heard the president himself personally address it in recent weeks, and he'll continue to address it. But I think the best way to address it is by him campaigning and showing voters what he's doing to lead the country and to solve these hard problems in the world, and framing up the choice. And so I think when voters see him up close, when they have a chance to go to the polls and cast their vote, they have been casting their vote in the primaries for him. I think the only way to reassure it is to get out there, campaign, answer the questions, and continue to press his agenda.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. And we really do get this from so many people that I think it's going to be very valuable for them to hear someone who's as close to the president respond directly to it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Tonight, President Biden will deliver the final State of the Union address of his first term in office. Traditionally, the State of the Union is a time for the president to recount his accomplishments. And it's that record, plus the unique threat of Donald Trump, that Democratic leaders think will carry Biden to victory. Democratic voters seem less certain. In polls, in interviews, they're worried about Biden's age. They wonder if he's their best option, and why he's their only option. But after hearing from Kamarck and Klain, the answer seems clear. Biden's nomination happened in large part because of tradition, deference, and the adherence to convention that governs party leaders. It happened because of politics as normal. The problem? These are abnormal times. That's the run-up for Thursday, March 7th, 2024. Now, the rundown. Joe Biden and Donald Trump were the overwhelming winners on Super Tuesday. But down ballot from the presidential race, there were a number of other noteworthy results. In the California Senate primary,
Democrat Congressman Adam Schiff and Republican Steve Garvey, a former MLB star, now advancing to go on to the general election.
Schiff and Garvey edged out two Democratic congresswomen, Katie Porter and Barbara Lee, and will go toe-to-toe in the runoff election. And in the North Carolina governor's race, the state's lieutenant governor, Mark Robinson, won the Republican primary.
Robinson is a right-wing firebrand and a Holocaust denier. He does have backing from Donald Trump.
Robinson will challenge Democrat Josh Stein in what's sure to be a closely watched contest. And finally, on Monday.
Into a major shakeup in the Arizona Senate race, independent Senator Kyrsten Sinema announcing last night she will not seek re-election.
Senator Sinema's departure clears the way for a competitive matchup between Democrat Ruben Gallego and Republican Kari Lake. We're now 243 days from the general election. We'll see you next week. The Run-Up is reported by me, Estet Herndon, and produced by Elisa Gutierrez, Caitlin O'Keefe, and Anna Foley. It's edited by Rachel Dry, Lisa Tobin, and Franny Kartoff, with original music by Dan Powell, Marian Lozano, Pat McCusker, Diane Wong, Sophia Landman, and Alicia Behitu. It was mixed by Sophia Landman and fact-checked by Caitlin Love. Special thanks to Paula Schumann, Sam Dolnick, Larissa Anderson, David Halfinger, Maddie Masiello, Mahima Chablani, and Jeffrey Miranda. Do you have a question about the 2024 election? Email us at therunup@nytimes.com. Or better yet, record your question using the voice memo app on your phone, and then send us the file. The email again is therunup@nytimes.com.
And finally, if you like the show and want to get updates on latest episodes, follow our feed wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, y'all.